All right, well, hopefully you can see the title slide there.
Yes, we can.
Great, okay. Great, well, thanks very much. It's great to be here, and I'm really quite excited to present some of the first results from the Bailiwick Bat Survey. I think this is probably, one of the most exciting projects I've been involved with over the last few years, and it's produced some really great stuff. It's really engaged people, really sort of connected people with bats. We've had hundreds of volunteers take part. The information it's going to produce is going to give us some really good information about how bats use the island and different habitats and how they use the landscape. And I think really there are some very important lessons that we can learn from this that can be sort of put into policy and practice. And this is very much a partnership project. So I'm from the British Trust for Ornithology, and you may ask why we're working on bats. My colleague Stu Newson at BTO has been working on acoustic or analysis of acoustic recordings to monitor bats for the last few years, and has really come up with a fantastic system whereby we can undertake these large-scale volunteer-based projects. So I'm from Guernsey originally, and I've been wanting to do this for a number of years. And ACLAMS, the state of Guernsey, when we approached them, were really keen to do this because it fitted very much within the strategy for nature. And they were keen to, well, we were all keen to work in partnership with everybody. And so Sarah at the Societe was appointed as coordinator. The Alderney Wildlife Trust have really come on board and taken over Alderney, the record centre, where all the data have ended up, have been fantastic as well. And really, we've worked with lots of different organisations across the island to make this happen. Right, so what is the Bailiwick Bat Survey? So it's a 4-year citizen science project, and the idea really is to map the different bat species across the Bailiwick of Guernsey. So we're including Alderney, Sark, Herm and Guernsey. It's quite ambitious. If we were doing this in the UK, we would be working on 1 kilometre squares, but we decided, given the size of the islands, and the sort of complexity of the landscape, a 500 by 500 metre square approach would be better. So really, when we looked at the number of 360, we thought, are we really going to cover 360 squares? But volunteers have stepped up, and we are getting towards that number. And it's only really been made possible through funding from the Strategy for Nature and the Biodiversity Partnership, and the states have funded this work. So to do a survey of this size involving hundreds of volunteers, we need to automate it as much as possible, because really it's a really big ask to ask a coordinator to do this. So we devised an online booking system whereby you can go to a map, online map, and click on a square. So you can see Alderney here. Some of these squares are red where people have requested them. If you click on a blue square, a box will come up. You can enter your name and email address, and you can then reserve that square. And that square is yours to survey throughout this year. You can also book a bat detector, and we've had some fantastic help from different organisations across the island who host the bat detectors. So Alderney Wildlife Trust up in Alderney, so you can go and borrow a detector from there. And you can see here the booking system, so you can book your slot, which is, it varies from the different bat centres depending on their opening times, but generally it's for sort of 4 or 5 days. In Guernsey, we've had 4 organisations: Candy Museum, the Gilorley Library, ACLAMS at Burnt Lane, and the Record Centre have all very kindly helped us sort of check in and book out detectors to volunteers. And in Sark, the Sark School have helped as well. So this is what it looks like. You get a box of kit, a pole, and the pole isn't that long. It does collapse down, so you don't have to strap it to the roof of your car. So you put your bat detector out. We're using Wildlife Acoustics Song Meter mini bats, and the great Wildlife Acoustics kit is very, very good. And you basically put your detector out in your square for 4 nights. And ideally, we ask people to put it either in the centre of the square or in habitat typical of the square. Now, that can be difficult depending on access, but we we do ask if people can contact landowners to try and put detectors in a sort of a spot that's typical of the habitat. So ideally, we don't just want to survey gardens, we want to survey the different habitats on the island. So although lots of people do put them in their gardens, and that's great because gardens cover almost a third of Guernsey, we do want to survey these other habitats. And we ask people to survey twice, once before middle of July and once after. So we get a sort of early and late picture of what's going on. So once you've put your detector out, here's Sarah, our coordinator, putting out the detector there. You basically sit back and wait for the results. So after your 4 days, you pick up your detector, and then you can upload your own recordings via what's called the BTO acoustic pipeline. So essentially, this is basically a web page. You go to it, you register, and you upload your recordings on your SD memory card. And then once they've uploaded, you can then enter various details about where they were. So you can put your latitude and longitude, and you can choose on the map here. So you can basically move the map around, double click on a site where your detector was, and then it will automatically enter the latitude and longitude of the recordings, and that's saved in the file name so that we know exactly where your detector was. And then at the bottom here, you can see save data, and that will go through the upload process. Now these uploads can be huge. We're talking, I don't know, 20, 30 megabytes in some cases, especially this time of year when we have a lot of bush crickets calling, and they do take hours and hours and hours. And we're really grateful to volunteers for sticking with this and yeah, basically sort of hanging on overnight for the uploads to finish. So after you've uploaded it, there is an automated analysis program which takes the recordings and produces the results. So you can see different uploads here. This is actually me, my account. And then normally within 24 hours, you get a CSV file with the recording name, species of bat, the probability that it is that species, and the date, etc., etc. Sometimes you get these low confidence ones. Anything below 50% we generally ignore, and then that data is stored and will be looked at later on in the season. Everything will be manually verified because this classifier isn't perfect. It's great for the common species, but when you're recording thousands and thousands of common pipistrelle, if one does something slightly odd, it could look like another species. So everything does have to be manually verified, and we will be doing that at the end of the season. So that's just a sort of a zoom in of the kind of results that you get. So where are we so far? So this was taken a snapshot a few days ago. We've had 2,500 survey nights undertaken so far this year. Almost 6 terabytes of data, over 3 million acoustic recording files processed, almost 2 million were identified to a species, of which 600,000 were bats, 1.2 million were bush crickets, 12,000 were small mammals, and then we have some other stuff down here as well. So the other species, there are a few things we put in, like moth species, which actually produce ultrasound as well. And then we've got some birds here as well. We haven't identified those species. So yeah, it's been a really good season. The uptake has been amazing. We've had over 200 volunteers take part. The first part of the survey was tricky because, as we heard yesterday from Bob and the Asian Hornet talk, April and May were really, really tough in terms of it was really cold and really windy, and virtually all the days in April were unsuitable for bat recording. It was either too cold for them, basically under 7 degrees, or too windy, anything above force 5. And bats don't really fly around. And similarly in May, it was really windy, and almost half the days were unsuitable for bat recording. So it was a bit of an unsettling start, but we soon got into the swing of it. So first results, and yeah, when I first saw these maps coming out last week, I was really quite excited about this, and there seemed to be some common themes coming out of this. So common pip is the most common species we have on the island. 95% of the records are of this species. So it's a very small bat, it's about 5 grams. particularly associated with woodland, but does occur elsewhere as well. So this map shows bat activity, and what we mean by this is the number of recordings, the number of time a bat passed the recorder, and the recorder recorded its presence in one of these 5-second recordings as it went past. So I think there's a fairly clear pattern here. There seems to be a sort of pretty, one area of high activity, sort of ranging from sort of Summeray Park, Summeray Nature Trail area, through the sort of wooded valleys, the Fouquet, Talbot valleys, moving over to the reservoir, and then onto the sort of escarpment area above Rockane, and again down to Pézeres down here. Interestingly, in the southeast, again, a line from sort of Havelotte down to sort of Moulin-Wet area, Petit-Bow area, there seems to be another area of concentration of activity. And that's a pattern that seems to be repeated across other species as well. So just sort of bear that in mind when I take you through these other species. On the other islands, again, they're common, really common on Jetu, very common on Herm, Sark as well, and Alderney, they're pretty much everywhere. Anywhere we recorded, we pick them up. Even on Baru out here, we had a few recordings of this species. Now, whether they're living on the island, I don't know, or whether they're just coming over from Alderney or passing through, migrating, we don't know, but yeah, we did record a few on Baru. In the others, you'll see here, I've got some different habitats. Now, Guernsey has undertaken a habitat survey, so most of the, pretty much all of the natural and semi-natural habitats on the island have been surveyed, and they are available on a GIS system, so we know where they are. So all I've simply done here is overlaid these points or these abundances over the habitat map and come out with the top 5 most important habitats for this species. And when I say most important, I mean where there is most bat activity. We're talking about feeding bats here and not necessarily where they're roosting. So this is where these are the most important habitats for feeding bats. And as you'd expect with the common pipistrelle, woodland features highly, but also interestingly, coastal grassland comes out as being important as well. And that's quite a rare habitat, as well as obviously woodland is not particularly common on the island either. Natterer's bat, this is a larger bat. Again, we saw quite a few of these early on when it was cold in April, and I guess just being that bit bigger, they were able to fly around when it was colder. Much more scarce, but widespread. So the most activity was again Summeray Park, the wooded valleys, reservoir, etc. And again in the southeast, but it may not be easy to see here, but you can see lots of little dots here. And actually, natterers were recorded in small numbers pretty much everywhere. So maybe these are the most important areas, maybe they're roosting in these areas, but certainly they are more widespread across the sort of the wider landscape. So presumably they're going out and foraging at night across these areas. Didn't record any in Herm, a few in Sark, and a few in Alderney. Grey long-eared bat. This is our common long-eared bat. And again, very widespread distribution, again, concentration, sort of wooded valleys, reservoir area. Some also interesting, some quite high abundances or activity up in the northeast of the island, slightly less in the southeast corner. But interesting here is that of the top 5 habitats, 3 of them are actually grassland. So this is a species of that goes and forages in more open areas, and some of these habitats are really quite rare. So, for example, semi-improved marshy grassland, less than 1% of the island is covered by this habitat. So they are do seem to be seeking out some of these scarce habitats. I think we had a few records on Herm, not many. And if you look at these little white dots, these are actually all the survey points And if they're not coloured, or they're coloured in white, that means we didn't record the species. In Sark, yeah, we had a few there. And Alderney, they were pretty widespread across the whole island, though none on Baru. The next common species, or sort of fairly common species, is Coull's pipistrelle. This was first discovered back in the island only a few years ago. And again, this seems to be a species more of the open areas. So the top habitats were coastal dune grassland, semi-improved marshy grassland, and then two woodlands as well. And I think this planted coniferous woodland is probably due to this blob down here near Pesmeres, where there's a lot of pines down there. This species is very similar to Nethusia's pipistrelle acoustically. So I'll go on and talk about why we're sure that these are Coull's pipistrelles and not Nethusia's pipistrelles a bit later. But again, very widespread across the island, concentrations in the southeast and the southwest, but also fairly widespread across the island. Again, on Herm and Jetu, this species was fairly common on Sark and also on Alderney as well. Now, this is the interesting one. This is something that I don't think we would have attempted, or Stu wouldn't have attempted a couple of years ago. But having really gone into detail of the differences in calls between grey long-eared and brown long-eared bat, he has been able to separate the two species. You probably can't do it on a single call, but you can do it on a sort of series of calls. So he gave me these results a few days ago, and said, just plot them out. They should be over woodland, and because brown long-eared bat is very much a woodland species, and yeah, absolutely. They're in the South Coast valleys, the wooded valleys. They're in the sort of Talbot, the sort of central wooded valleys. They're around the reservoir. That underneath that blob is some woodland. They're in a patch of woodland there, a patch of woodland there. So yeah, they are. We are pretty confident that brown long-eared bat is a species that is in small numbers in Guernsey and is properly resident and breeding. And I think this is probably a good point to sort of start thinking about what we do next with this survey. And actually, a species like this, some targeted follow-up work in woodlands, maybe some misnetting to try and understand what these bats are doing, would really be very, very valuable. And something hopefully the bat section of the Society can follow up. Another new species we discovered was ceratine. This is a big bat, so they really are quite large, much larger than pipistrelles. Excuse me. And they first appeared in Alderney for a 2-week period in July. Lots of detectors that were put out were picking up ceratines, and then after 2 weeks they stopped, and then a bit later they started in Guernsey. So it's quite a sort of I don't know. It could be one bat that sort of flown around Alderney for 2 weeks and came to Guernsey and flew around, or it could be two different migrants, or we don't know really. It's a species that suddenly appeared midsummer. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next couple of months, or the past couple of months, to see whether these records do carry on in September and October. Because these records that I'm talking about go up to early September. So anyway, ceratines are easy to identify acoustically, so we're really sure that it was this species. Now, when you have this amount of effort, it's likely you'll come up with some rare species. So we've come up with a few species that are new to the islands. So great excitement. Andrew Lee, one of the bat section members, had a lesser horseshoe bat down here in the southeast early on in the survey, and we've had 4 records of greater horseshoe bat. Now, it's quite disappointing that we haven't found more of these, because we know that they are on the island in small numbers, but we haven't actually detected that many. I think in those 4 recordings, or sort of those 4 sites, only, I don't know, 7 or 8 recordings. So really they were just flypasts. So there's not really much we can infer from that. But perhaps 2 in the southeast corner could be worth following up. Yeah, it's a shame we didn't get more of these. And I think a lot of volunteers would have had this species appearing in their list of species, but this is where the manual checking comes in. We did have one detector that was faulty and was putting out its own noise that sounded incredibly like a horseshoe bat. So we had hundreds of recordings from this detector, which we had to discard, and it's now gone back to the manufacturers to be replaced. And also, we've had a bit of an issue with some bats getting very close to the microphone and overloading the microphone, so basically being too loud for it. And when you get this overloading, you get acoustic soundings which do sound a bit like horseshoe bat. And so it's really obvious on the when you look at it manually that it's not, but the classifier we're using has picked it out as being a horseshoe bat. So this is why every single scarce species record has to be checked. And we've done that up until the beginning of September. And then finally, whiskered or Brandt's bat, which are very similar acoustically, were recorded twice on Alderney and once down at Cherbourg in Guernsey. I think whiskered bat has been recorded on Alderney before, so it's not necessarily a surprise. So I've shown you some maps of activity. Now, bats give 2 different types of calls. There are lots of different types of calls actually, but they do echolocating calls where they're hunting, but they also give out social calls where they're basically chatting to other bats around them, interacting with them socially. And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is they often occur around roosts. So when bats are mingling before they go to roost or after they come out, they can give these social calls. But also, secondly, they are very, very distinctive. So if you've got 2 species that are similar to each other acoustically in their echolocation calls, using social calls, you can really pin down exactly which species you're talking about. So this is similar to the map I showed you earlier, the activity. These are the social calls from the naturalist bat in brown. So Summeray Park, the sort of central wooded valleys. This is just under St. Peter's Church, down at Cherbourg, around the reservoir. And if you overlay them onto the activity, you can see that we've picked social calls up in a few areas, but actually there's activity all around. So it'll be interesting to go to these places and follow these up and see if we can actually find roosts in these areas. So calls, pipistrelle. I said that these were acoustically similar to Nethusius, but the social calls are extremely different. So this is the activity that we had. This is the social calls that we had. Again, this sort of area around Summeray Park seems to be quite important. Down at Pézeres as well. And then you can overlay the 2. And following up some of these would really be quite interesting. Now, what's important about this is that we had no social or male advertisement calls from Nethusius pipistrelle at all, which means it's very unlikely to be a breeding species, as they really are very vocal, especially in autumn. So as we've not had any sort of clue that Nethusius is present on the island, we are convinced and sure that these are calls pipistrelles, especially from these social calls as well. So this is the other thing I was really quite excited about, was lots of species make ultrasound. So if you're out at night, you can hear an ultrasound, you'll hear a sort of cacophony of sound from all kinds of different things, from bats, small mammals, even moths as well. Moths produce ultrasound to interfere with bat echolocation calls. basically jamming bats. So it's really quite exciting that we can actually start to look at the distribution of some of these other species as well. So shrews are a big part of the small mammal fauna in Guernsey, and I think for the first time we produced a map of shrew abundance or activity across the islands. It's very clear. I haven't actually done the analysis when you got this a couple of days ago, but it's very clear they're mostly in agricultural areas, so in improved grass and arable areas, gardens as well, seem to be sort of the key habitats for the species. They're present on Herm. We knew that already just through observations. They're not on Jetu. They're all over Alderney. Sark, no, it's a bit disappointing. We didn't pick up any shrews at all in Sark. There are quite a few recordings yet to come from Sark, so hopefully we might find some, because they have a different species. They have lesser white-toothed shrew on Sark, and it'd be great to get some recordings of that. I think what's it'd be nice to do is I'm just going to give you a sound recording of what a shrew sounds like. So if you could hear in ultrasound, that's what you would hear at night, and they're quite distinctive. They're not like bats at all, so you can be very clear that these are actually shrews. Oops. So next, everybody's favorite species, the rat. Yeah, as I think the old adage goes, you're never more than a few meters away from a rat, and I think that's fairly true. They're all over the islands. Interestingly, not on Lihu. We didn't pick them up. We didn't pick up any on Herm or Jetu. I don't think that's right. I don't think we were recording in the right places. I think if you were recording around, I don't know, the pub or the sort of central sort of bit of Herm, you may well pick them up. And we picked up a few on Sark as well. Now I put rat species here because you get black rat on Sark as well, and black and brown rats acoustically are very, very similar, and they're difficult to difficult to separate acoustically. You have to actually look for other evidence as well. Alderney, yeah, again, we've got a few rat sightings here or observations here. Interestingly, you've got one on one of the little forts offshore, and this sort of highlights the fact that actually rats on these offshore islands where seabirds nest can be a really big problem, and you can actually use acoustic recorders to pick up whether rats are present or not. So you can use these detectors to detect rat presence on islands. Thankfully, none on Baru. Didn't pick any up there, which is good because that's the key, one of the key seabird islands in the Bailiwick. Can move on to another group of animals, bush crickets. Now, bush crickets mostly, well, a lot of them do actually make ultrasound at night, and I'll just give you a few examples, and they're really quite distinct. So this is speckled bush cricket. This is great green bush cricket.
We're not really hearing anything.
Oh, you're not, okay.
No, we did for the shrew.
Ah, okay. Okay, I'll dispense with that then. Anyway, trust me, they are quite different. Again, we've only got the results in the last few days, so we are starting to, we'll need time to digest these, but speckled bush cricket seem to be everywhere around the coast and also in the middle of the island. Long-winged conehead seem to be most abundant around the edge of the island in Sark. Interestingly, these species weren't present in Herm. Great green bush crickets everywhere, and this is the species that is really overwhelming the recordings over the last I don't know, 3 months, probably from July, August, September, we're getting so many bush crickets that they're recording. The number of recordings that you're getting is numbering in the thousands, and it is proving difficult to upload some of these things. But we've never had such a problem with bush crickets before, so Guernsey seems to be an exceptionally good place for bush cricket. And then finally, short-winged conehead. This is a species of wet grass, and we've had a few records. 2 of them have been manually verified by Stuart, and we'll be following these up in the future. Yeah, so short-winged conehead is a species that hasn't been verified on the island before, and Liz from the Record Centre very kindly sent me this map last night of unverified records of short-winged conehead, and it's interesting just to compare our map from the acoustic map on the left with her map on the right. You've got these 2 areas here around Petrollery Road, which correspond to these 2 here, where we picked up, and Stuart's verified one of these as being as definitely having short-winged conehead. You've got a site up here near the Bell Pond. Again, we picked up this area here. A site in the sort of extreme northeast. Again, we've got records up here. Marshy grasslands down here, and so on and so on. So acoustically, I think we can actually record this species fairly well. Now, the problem we've got with this species is that it records, it's most active during the day and not the night. So I think if we were going to use acoustic recorders to survey the species, we'd need to change the settings and include some daytime recording as well. And then just for Alderney, again, the 4 different species showing their distribution. This is quite marshy up this end of the island, so this is where you'd expect the short-winged coneheads as well. And there's loads and loads of data to follow up here in the future. So to conclude, the response by volunteers has been amazing, and it wouldn't have been possible to do this without volunteers. You would need to employ a whole raft of people, and it would be awfully expensive to actually do this professionally, as it were, or hiring professional field workers. Within a few days of us going live in April, 80% of the squares were taken, and we're now, I'm not sure what we're up to, but it's probably around 90% have been surveyed. We've recorded 10 species of bat across the islands, several species of which hadn't been recorded before. We're very happy that brown long-eared bat is present on the island and is probably a scarce resident. And then we've got all this bonus stuff as well. So we've got shrew data, rat data, vole data, a load of stuff on bush crickets to follow up. We've got some stuff on moths. So really there's an awful lot of information about the different species that were contained in the recordings. And we'll start over the winter to see how the landscape interacts with the bat activity. And woodlands and wet grassland seem to be really important. They seem to be these wet areas which are really scarce on the island. Less than 1% of Guernsey is covered by these wet areas. Seem to be key, as does woodland as well. Now, woodland cover, I guess, is increasing on the island, but has increased over the past few decades. But these wet areas, as wet grassland, have been dramatically reduced in area on the island. And really, I think it needs the results of this need to be sort of fed into any sort of policy or management plans following up to cover these wet areas. So the next steps, we're going to analyse the final 2 months of recordings. I'm downloading a load now. We're going to be looking at the influence of habitat. We've also, in the habitat survey, got a load of information on boundary features, so we're looking at that. And we'll also be looking at landscape connectivity as well, so looking at how a bat might view the landscape, as it were, in terms of sort of suitable habitats to move between areas of the island. And I've underlined landscape there because I think one of the things this has really shown is that we need to take a landscape approach to conserving bats on the island. And Miranda in her talk yesterday also, I think the pollinators sort of took the same approach. Actually, we need to sort of take a more than a single site approach, more than a nature reserve approach. We need to have a much more general sort of think about how we manage the island for these species that range over wide areas and use lots of different habitats. So after we've analysed everything, following up some of these things would be great if the bat section society could do this. If there are other opportunities to increase skills on the island by training people up to catch bats, that would be really, really useful. We've got 3 more years of data collection to go, and we'll be following up some of these leads that we've had from this season, but also repeat surveys are going to be extremely valuable just to really sort of confirm some of these habitat relationships. And then I hope we can do some more communications about this and raise the profile of bats on the islands and feed the results into policy and practice sort of further down the line as we get more results. So that's it. I'd just like to thank all of our volunteers who have taken part this season. Their response has been amazing. All the bat centres who've allowed us to use them as vehicles for volunteers to pick up and drop off detectors. And then in the islands, thank you to Jack and Daniel at Alderney Wildlife Trust, Robert in Herm, Bill in Jetu, and Linda in Sark for really helping coordinate the survey of the islands. Without them, getting this sort of full partnership working, this sort of full across island working would not have been possible. So thank you to them, and thank you to everybody else, and thank you to you.